Baba, please give me the words to share here, because I don't do this very often, and hardly ever. But Devana was just here from India, and she said something that hit me, that our lives are laid out perfectly by God, by Baba, and for us to accept what our lives are is kind of one of the essences, and go along with what has been given. And just really, and the older I get, I'm 74 now, and almost 75. And the older I get, the more I realize the gems that God has given me and everyone, really. And it's not always perfect, and we don't always get what we want, but trying to align with what He wants to give us. And it's kind of been sweet the last year or so, just really realizing these gifts. And a lot of the gifts are the people, certainly maybe some of the Mandali, or some of the American disciples like Darwin, Jean, but also the Buddhists say Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and the Buddha is Baba, of course. The Dharma is the truth, the wisdom that is written, and the Sangha is us, and how rich that is, and how I realized it's a much bigger part of our spiritual journey than I knew a few years ago, and a very rich, because they're real life people that we love and can, help, and they can help us. So I guess I wanted to just share early on, I remember being about like 6 years old. For some reason, 6 is my lucky number, and at that age, it's like I woke up or something, and I used to, talk to God. I'd be like in my bed before going to sleep and just talk to God, and it felt like God was there as my friend, and it was real, and but it was very natural. 6-year-old kids are very natural, and it just felt like, well, God can hear me, and I can hear Him a little bit, and so we'd talk a little bit when I was 6 years old. And then I guess the other great influence is my grandmother was very much remind me of Kitty Davy. She's extraordinary woman, lived to be 96 years old. And she and my grandfather were missionaries in China, and that's where my mother was born with her siblings. And my mother grew up there till she was 18 and spoke Chinese before she spoke English. And but my grandmother was just this extremely loving, very funny, wise woman. And Rose Martin. And she would write me these beautiful letters about God, and just beautiful handwriting, and just beautiful letters about God. And I think that was when my first, you might say, inner spiritual experience, growing up from a small age to, it carried all the way through into college. She would write me these beautiful letters. And I guess that just made me, she gave me that realization that God is extremely loving, and not a judging God, but a loving God. And I think that influence has carried with me. And so when I met Kitty Davy, it felt like, oh, it's like my grandmother. And, funny and wise, and very loving. You knew you were loved when you were with her. So those are some of the early influences. And then, had good teenagehood and played sports. And my parents also had a strong faith, in the Congregational Church. The Congregational churches, the white churches of New England, those beautiful white churches, every town had one. And they were really descendants from the Pilgrims and the Puritans, and seeking a direct connection with God, not through the Catholic Church or not through a priest, or just directly to God. And so my parents, that was our church, and it was a really pretty good place to grow up. And then we had a great youth program, and this wonderful young minister who was our youth leader, and we were very open-minded. We would invite people from the black community, or there was we had 220 kids on a Sunday night, and 15% were Jewish and Catholic, and because it was a cool thing we were doing, and I was very involved in that. So I guess that's how it kind of started too, where that community of fellow people that are seeking God and seeking goodness, that's how that kind of started to evolve, And so I had that good faith, and then it went on, went to college, and as soon as I got to college, a whole world had opened up. So I started reading, I think more like sophomore year, maybe. I graduated in 68 from high school, so I went to college, 68, to Union College in Schenectady, which turns out was the same town where I went to college, was about 2 or 3 miles from where Darwin and Jean Shaw lived. Of course, I didn't know that. How Baba weaves into our story when we don't even know it. So I went to college there, and I found out years later that they used to go to the chapel Christmas programs, and they went to this beautiful, when I was in college, there was this beautiful garden with a stream running through it in the campus, and that's where Darwin would bring Jean when she was feeling kind of down, maybe postpartum or something, and they went to this garden a lot, and that garden became my refuge. That was I loved nature, grew up playing in the woods, and this place was a place I could go and just feel God's presence. And it's found out years later that Darwin and Jean would go there often. And so anyway, I'm starting to read more Eastern philosophy, like Tao Te Ching and the I Ching and Alan Watts and other people like that. And so I'm starting to open up, sophomore year. And then it's junior year, and it's, fall. And as we did back in those days, I had a girlfriend who lived off campus, and she and I grew some marijuana in the back of her parents' yard. It was a big enough yard behind the lilacs, but her parents were they were away on vacation, were coming back, so her brothers and sisters harvested the stuff, and so we had mounds of this marijuana. And then, so it was my birthday, November 2nd, 1970, and I was living off campus, and we were having a little tiny birthday celebration, and this guy knocks on the door and wants to buy some drugs, and I said, I'm not into that, and then I said, but I do have marijuana. You can have some, and they insisted on paying me for it. So he paid me $5, a nickel bag, and then unfortunately he came back a couple times. So I thought, oh shit, I can make $5 here, and I sold it to him, and then he came back again. I said, no, I'm not into this, man, And so about, I don't know, 3 months later, at about 4 a.m, the cops broke through the door and arrested me and my roommates, and found little bit of marijuana, and I got arrested for selling marijuana. And so a long series of, hearings and stuff like that. I got a fairly light sentence. I had to do weekends in jail, and then during the week I had to do community service. So I was working in a inner city daycare, and every Saturday and Sunday I would be in jail, and so this is going on, and there was they had a hunger strike to try to get better conditions in the jail, and that fell apart. But when I got in jail, I thought, well, you still have a good reason to have a hunger strike. And, we had been fighting the war in Vietnam with the Quakers, and we got that going. And so when the hunger strike went down again, we had Quakers and Catholics picketing the jail, and they were on the news and all that stuff. And we actually got conditions improved. And so one Saturday, I'm in jail, and then this guard comes and gives me a package. And it's a package from a friend of mine who I grew up with, Rich Levitin, the chiropractor in Charleston. So I just opened it up, and it was a book, and I opened the book in the middle of the book, and I just started reading these words, and these words just really hit my heart. They were more deep and profound than anything that I'd read up to that point. And every word seemed true, and I'm like, yeah, that's true, wow. And I just kept reading for like 15 pages, and it was like everything I believed is like he was saying so clearly, and it just hit my heart. And I went, wait a minute, who is this guy? And I went back to the beginning, and of course it was Meherabad, and the book was Listen Humanity, that for some reason many people have come to. And that began my journey, really. And I kept reading the book, Listening to Humanity. And so my quick story is I can joke that a guard in the Schenectady County Jail gave me my first Baba book. But in fact, it came from Rich Levitin, he grew up like 2 streets away from me in Longmeadow, Mass, where I grew up, near Springfield, Mass. So anyway, it goes on like that. And then, so I had this very beginning, by the end of the summer, I had this feeling that I didn't know, I didn't know Baba well, but all I knew is there was nowhere else to go. There was nothing else that could be as great as this. So I still had many journeys to go, and for me, it was a slow, gradual. Some people have this great awakening. This was more like, for me, it was a step by step, like a train building up steam, and it was not an all of a sudden thing for me. But anyway, I still had that book, and I brought it with me. I went on a language program to France that fall, and then I didn't know any Baba people. It turns out later I found out that Ken Rickstadt, Jeff, and Denny Moore used to hang out at the park right next to the jail. Well, so when I was in jail this is 1971 now, so I'm in jail. There's Ken and Jeff and Denny Moore hanging out like within a block of where I was. And Darwin and Jean were about 3 miles away. And I'm sure, even though I didn't know it, that all influenced what happened. And so anyway, then the process, like I said, was kind of a slow process, but then I went back to Europe after graduating, and in 1973, I felt really drawn to Europe, and I brought my Baba poster with me. Oh, that's what happened in between. Is I think it was senior year. I just had that beautiful open Sadra picture that said, "You and I are not we, but one." And I used to just sit there. Now it's about a year and a half since I met Baba, and I would just sit there in the living room of my apartment and just gaze deeply into Baba. And that's where I started to go more inward, I think, at that point. And I felt, Baba through that, especially that picture, they call it the Sadra picture. It's kind of an open, Sadra's open a little bit, and that picture, Baba's extremely open, and so I felt like I could begin to dive into him. And I'd spend, half an hour, 45 minutes just gazing at him. And so that was, I think, the beginning of the more conscious inner journey. And so then graduated, and then, 6 months later, I was in Europe, and I'd brought my "You and I, but not we, but one" poster, and showed my friends in Germany that, and had several Baba books and things I could share with people. And then for me, unfortunately, there's many people who were very lucky and got to go to India really early, like in the early 70s, and I unfortunately wasn't one of those. I didn't get to India for many, many years later, unfortunately. But what did happen is at the end of that trip to Europe, I went back to France and was picking grapes along the way down in France, and saw my French family, and then picked grapes in La Mancha, where Don Quixote was. And anyway, but I was pulled like a magnet down to Morocco, not to Marrakesh, but to the more eastern and southern parts of Morocco, where it joined the Sahara. And I didn't know where I was going, but I just kept getting pulled by a magnet, and met some great people to travel with, and they were, we lived with a Bedouin family in the desert, but then I still felt like I was on this solo journey, so I went to several towns more into the desert, and didn't know where I was going still, as that's the way you travel, and that's kind of the way life is, I think. Even though we think we're going somewhere, but we don't really know where we're going. But God is guiding us where we're going. And so I'm sitting on the top of this dump truck loaded with supplies going deep into the Sahara. That's how they brought supplies in. And there'd be like 6 of us sitting on top of the dump truck. And all of a sudden, about 15 miles away, I see these beautiful salmon-colored mountains of sand. I didn't know what they were, just salmon-colored mountains. And as soon as I saw them, I knew that's the place. I got to go there. And so I went there, and it was these 1,000-foot-high sand dunes that were swept up, the finest sand you could imagine. And I got water and food and went out into the desert. And this is kind of like what Baba gave me as my early trip to India. It was not in India, but I felt like I was there in the desert, and it was, everything's been stripped away. My language, my country, my culture. It was only sand and sky and sun, no clouds. And I was out there for 3 days, and it felt like in that place, being stripped away and opened up, in retrospect, it felt like I was able to touch the source. Because everything else was stripped away. And sort of the source of life. And it was not, Baba being God, I couldn't, that was too much for me. So I just, when I first heard about Baba, I just had to put that whole thing on the shelf to the side. That was, all I knew was I loved him. And in fact, whether he was God or not that's a little too much. So let's put that to the side. And anyway, so in that essence, it didn't matter whether Baba was God or not. It's like I felt like I was given this gift of touching the source of life, of spirit. And then once that happened, I realized it's time to go home. So I started my long trip back through Morocco to Gibraltar and all the way back through Spain to France to Germany. But I remember going across Gibraltar, and that's when I realized I had been changed. I felt like this whole year in Europe and Morocco and the gift to the desert, I felt like I had been given a very precious gift. And it was like I was carrying this gift on the boat going across to Gibraltar, but the gift wasn't for me. It was to be shared. And in a way, I was just telling an old friend of mine I met in Europe that in a way it feels like that gift from the desert is still bubbling up. It's still like, it's still to be shared. It's still coming up. So I guess then the other big thing is my best friend in the world, he's 2 months, amazing how Baba works, Okay, he's 2 months younger than me. We've known each other our whole lives. His name's Ron Kaplan, lived right next door to me, was my best friend. And he was also friends with Richard Levitin. So Richard turned both of us, as well as Perry Kittredge, onto Baba. And to this day, my oldest friend in the world is still a Baba lover. And I see him once or twice a year up in New Jersey. And we're gotten closer and closer. And pretty amazing, though, how both of us, right next door to each other, we've known each other 75 years almost. And so anyway, so he and Jackie, who was his girlfriend at the time, Jackie Sobel Kaplan, we all said, we got to get to the center. Now it's 4 years after they found out about Baba in '69, so we all felt we got to go to the center. So it was springtime, we had a week off vacation, and we, drove down, of course, to the center, and we saw Richard in Spartanburg, and then we only had 24 hours at the center. But everything happened in that time. It was like everything opened up. We got to go to the beach. We got to go to the lagoon cabin. Jane Haynes opened Baba's house for us. We got to meet Kitty and Elizabeth. Elizabeth, was still there. And so it was like, even though we had 24 hours, everything was packed into that time, And so it didn't even matter that it was 24 hours. It was so much was given, and we felt Baba's presence. And Ron and I were already kind of with Baba, but Jackie was not so sure, but she got zapped in the lagoon cabin, so we're all heading back, and they were going to drop me in Washington where I was working. And anyway, so it was the Kentucky Derby weekend, and that was the year that Avatar won the Kentucky Derby. And I think Avatar beat Diablo, and foolish pleasure came in third. So, these little things, they're not, they really don't mean a lot, but yet you can see Baba's humor and Baba's, it seems like they're all woven in, and these people that we meet, grace to meet. And so I went back and and then my wonderful job, I had met this guy after Europe. I met this guy in the airport. When I got back from the European trip, I had no money. I had 1 rupee that an Indian yogi had given me in Geneva. That was the only money I had. And this nice businessman took pity on me and bought me dinner, and we had this fantastic talk about how there's a potential inside of everyone. Like Michelangelo would see the vision of the figure within the stone, and then he would just take away what wasn't part of the stone, of the figure. And so we had a beautiful talk, and I thought, another interesting person on this trip. And then 2 weeks later, he offers me a job to set up a philanthropic foundation in New York to give money to young people. So I had to travel around the country. I'm getting paid now to travel around the country to meet all these interesting people. And believe me, that's a whole nother story, the people I met. So then that ended. I went back to Massachusetts and met dear friends, Peter Travisano, who's been to the center now 6 times, and he's with Ramakrishna. And then I met Jean, my wife, she had 2 little boys who were 7 years old, Sean and Chris. And Jean was Tibetan Buddhist, and very strong Tibetan Buddhist. She's one of 5 people who invited Dodrop Chen Rinpoche to the US. And that became part of my Baba story, really. I'll say more about that later. That at first it was difficult. That was her thing and this was my thing, but they were both devotional paths. And she was devoted to Dodrop Chen Rinpoche and I was devoted to Baba. So we actually blended really well. It was never a problem in our spiritual paths, And so still I've heard about Darwin and Jean, but I've not gone there. And Philip Krieger he had been living in Amherst, and he went to India for the first time in, I think, 76 or 77. And so he came back and he was looking for my friend Ron Kaplan, who lived in Amherst. And someone said, well, he's not here, but there's another Baba lover here. So I was the first Baba lover Philip met in the US. He had been in India and found out about Baba. Now Philip is back here, and so we became close friends. And then we went he had already gone to Darwin's once, and then he and I went to Darwin and Jean's. And that was a huge moment of transformation. Darwin and Jean would greet you at the door with just a big hug of their little simple home. And you just felt so loved. They were very simple people, like kind of hidden yogis. They seemed, Jean would complain about stuff, and Darwin was just simple and loving. But underneath their simplicity was this depth of love for Baba. And that's why, so I started going about every month, because it was a 2-hour trip from Massachusetts to Schenectady. But it was, that really became my Baba group, because now at Amherst area, there wasn't many Baba people around. And there's a few, but not many. But that was such a draw to go to Darwin's meetings, and so many people would, the Buffalo, the Buffalo group would come down, from Buffalo, and he loved the Buffalo group, as we all do still. And then people would come down from Montreal, and one interesting side note that Debbie Peterson, who became Debbie Meyer, who became Hannah Meyer and Hannah Peterson now, she was the very first young person to come to Darwin and Jean's meetings. She was 17 years old. She lived in Ballston Spa, 10 miles away from Schenectady, and knocked on their door. And before that, there was these little old ladies who were going to Darwin and Jean's meetings in the late 60s. And all of a sudden, Hannah knocked on the door, and then Rick Dryden came, and the Flint, Hugh Flick and Bart Flick came, and then it started to grow. And then Jamie started coming from Boston, and Philip and I were coming, and people would come up from New York quite a bit too. Bobby Bernstein and Ann Ross, of course, was going a lot there. Bill Cliff, and many, many, many more. So that became our group, and extremely important to our growth. It was our home, and that started a lifelong friendship with Darwin that went on till the end of his life. And then in '89, he moved, and Jean moved to Little River, and that was a big loss for us. And then a couple of years later, I had been doing carpentry for 16 years, and raising my family. I didn't have money to go to India, because we were raising the kids and all that, and helping to build the Tibetan temple. A really rich life, great. And I would say about Sean and Chris, they're not my biological sons, but they're my they're my karmic sons. They're, they're meant to be in my life, and both wonderful, wonderful guys who have also married two wonderful, strong women. And so that all went on, but I felt, fortunately, unfortunately, pulling apart from Jean. So we got divorced, and then finally I had not gone to India because I didn't have the money, but I also felt like I wasn't worthy to go. And then by that point, by around '86, I said, I don't care if I'm worthy or not, I'm going. And so finally I got to go to India in '88. And that was also a huge marker. It felt right at home, just so at home there. And it feels still like one of my homes. And the beautiful thing is I got to meet Mara. She passed away in '89, but this is 1988, and just what an amazing soul she is. It's like, a lot of people have light in their eyes, and people who are enlightened or have light in their eyes, but I saw she had all light in her eyes. It was just so beautiful, and so also so natural and down to earth, the way she would giggle, and of course she'd tell stories of Bob, and pretty much every time at some point she would start to cry because her love for him was so great. And but that was part of the sharing. It let us know what real love is. Just being with Mara let us know what real love is. And on that trip also, it's interesting how it's woven in with the Buddhism, and that's become more, I realized what a blessing that is, because I had helped build the first temple and the second temple, and I helped build the Chorten, which is it's a white, beautiful monument that has sacred things inside of it. So there's ashes of past lamas and stuff. And so I was very involved with I was very involved with the Tibetan, but I saw it as an extension of Baba. I was still always with Baba, you know. I'd sometimes visualize Baba. You know, I started to get more involved, and I would even do some of the long retreats and chants. And there's this beautiful one where you're looking at the Buddha, you know, or Guru Rinpoche, who brought Buddhism to Tibet, and then Guru Rinpoche sends out a light ray that hits your heart, and you become this whole red light ray, and you then go back and join into the heart of the Buddha. And that's the visualization. And while you're chanting, and they have the technology of enlightenment down. They've been working on it for centuries. And so what I would, of course, envision Meherabad. I would do that visualization, but it would be Meherabad that I would be giving my heart to, or joining my heart into his heart. And so it was really a very important part of my life. And I'm realizing as I've gotten older what a blessing it is, amazing blessing, to be very good friends with these lamas, Tulku Tundrup, that Kendra has edited his books, and Lama Jigsae was our example of how to live, just the most loving person. And so what a blessing to actually be and work and serve these people, you know, just very fortunate. So it wasn't separate from Baba. I realized it was not at all separate. And I even, like on that first trip to India, I went first on a Buddhist pilgrimage. I went, I went to Varanasi, and right outside of Varanasi was where Buddha first taught Satara. And Varanasi itself is, I mean, Baba went there many times, and unbelievable to be out on the Ganges as the dawn is coming up, and you're sending a little light out in a leaf, you know. And then on to Bodh Gaya, where Buddha became enlightened, you know, and meeting lamas there, Kala Rinpoche, and it was just unbelievable how lucky, how fortunate. And God, and I think I flew up to Nepal the first trip too. Oh my God. And was hanging out with these huge, you know, amazing lamas there, and in Kathmandu. Anyway, so after all this, I come back, and I'm going to Samadhi. And I didn't sing much back then, and I was walking in Lower Meherabad with Havovi, and so I just mentioned I'd like to sing this song, but I'm a little shy to sing it. And first I said, actually, I don't tell people this, but I just was going to all these Buddhist places, and I'm a little embarrassed. You know, here I'm at Meherabad, I'm embarrassed to say that. And then Havovi goes, no, you should be very proud of it. She's like, very strong, you know. And I said, okay, all right, got it. And then I said, there's a song I'd like to sing. And she go, but I'm shy to sing. And she said, that's okay, I'll sing it with you. She loved these romantic songs. So the first song I ever sang at Samadhi was Can't Help Falling in Love with You, that Elvis sang at the end of every concert. And it's a perfect romantic song to Baba. So, yeah, being in Meherabad the first time, wow. As we know, it's, talk about being at the source. Just being able to lay your head on the Samadhi. And everything, meeting all the other Erich and Mani. Oh my God. Whew. These people are so loving in such a natural way. Like I'm in Meherabad and I'd just gone through this separation. We weren't quite divorced, but big change in my life. And I'm pretty outgoing, but I was pretty quiet. And near the end of the trip, I said, Mani, could I talk to you? And she said, okay, And then she brought me into Erich's room, which is, I guess, the Mananash cabin, and which I didn't know that, of course, just this simple room. We're sitting together on the bed, and I started to tell her that, I'm going through this divorce, and it's difficult, and I'm, it's a challenge. And then she said, oh, we thought you were just kind of shy. And I said, no, I'm not that shy, but it's a challenging time. And then she told me this amazing story. She said, when this started happening in the late 70s, very prominent Baba couples were getting divorced, like Malcolm and Barbara and many others. And she said, we, meaning the Mandali, we felt that the people were going away from Baba, and that they weren't following, because Baba, wanted people to stay in their marriage and stay with their commitment and all that. And we felt they were going away from Baba. She said, but then it kept happening. There was many divorces, and both with very strong Baba lovers sometimes. And so she said, now we feel like you should do your best to stay married. But sometimes it's almost like people are living several lifetimes within one lifetime, and that phase is over, and now it's a new time for them. And you should always, of course, do your best. Don't try to stay with it. But just her sharing that to me I felt like this burden kind of falling away from me. It was, her compassion was so great, and can you imagine that? The Mandali, the way they felt like, well, we were limited in the way we saw it. Someone as great as Mani, but it made it all the better because it shows their humanity also. But that was what touched me, was just her care, and Erich just, I didn't get to talk to him as much, but my name was Damien, so he would just greet me, arm in arm, and he'd go, Father Damien. The priest in Hawaii, would work with lepers, and it was just a way of connecting, this arm in arm hug, two brothers, kind of thing. So anyway, so then I came back, and it was, just the life very much continued. But then I felt I was a carpenter, and I felt the pull. Darwin and Jean were now in Myrtle Beach, so I felt the pull, missing them. And I wanted to go to graduate school in social work to get a degree to do therapy. And so I applied, different places, Boston College, UMass, Smith College, and I also applied to East Carolina University. And so I got accepted to several places. I could have gone to Smith College, right? Lived in my beautiful 1820s farmhouse that we had restored, and rich life with great friends and all that. And my closest Baba friends was Carol Rose, who is Jamie Newell's godmother, his mother's best friend, but who's really been, Jamie kind of brought Carol to Baba. Carol Rose became a fierce Baba lover and very close to Darwin and Jean. And so she was by far my closest person emotionally. Baba lover. And so I couldn't decide, lose my friends, leave my home, or go down to East Carolina and be near the center. And it was going on for a month, and I had to make a decision. I was going to lose the acceptance. And finally I was out on my back deck looking at the apple trees, and underneath all the confusion, you might say, I just heard this voice underneath say, "I want you down here." So I just said, okay, that's it. I knew it was Baba saying, "I want you down here." So I just didn't think about anything else. I didn't think how difficult it would be to leave my home or, everything. I just said, okay. So I did that and went to East Carolina, and of course I immediately, the first weekend was at the center. It was about 3 hours away, So, and then I'm at the center, and Ralph Hernandez is the gateway, and this is now 1992, and so Ralph is at the gateway. "Oh, you're going to East Carolina. You should look up Jim Watson," because Jim and Ray Apley built the Stella and Ralph's house. They were both carpenters, so he knew Jim very well. And Jim worked at East Carolina University in geology. And so I said, okay. So I just called him up and met him, and we became fast friends. And he's still one of my best friends. And so I had this time at East Carolina doing social work, and I'm trying to think, in the summer, I can't remember when I started working at the center, but anyway, I was so pulled. I had missed the center so much, being all the way up in Massachusetts. I would come first after 4 years, then after 2 years, then every year, then twice a year. So I had missed it so much that now I'm 3 hours away. So about every 3 weeks I was at the center, and people thought I had moved here, But I just felt this pull to be there, So anyway, that goes on, and graduated from there, and then I applied to different places for jobs, and I wanted to get a job in Myrtle Beach because I really felt pulled to be here. And so I got a really good job. It was as a school social worker. So that was, I had summers off. I had really good work in the schools. I love kids, so I got to work with kids from kindergarten through 12th grade. And then I get to live in North Myrtle and just commute half an hour up to Brunswick County and Charlotte. And so really wonderful. And then I didn't know a lot of people. I knew Bob Brown, Jane Brown, Jeff Wolverton. That was pretty much it. And then, but got to know Barbara and other people, you know, Dennis and Malcolm, Lee. But I was friends with Jane, and I said, Jane, I'd really like to work at the youth office. And she said, well, ask Barbara, you know. So I think it was now, I started work in 94, so 95 I asked, and they let me come. And been working there ever since. And that's been a huge, wonderful gift. I think it's one of the best things we do here at the center. It's just such a open time, and the kids take over the center, and these wonderful counselors in their 20s, and I'm so happy to be part of it. You know, I'm sort of the support staff, helping to set up the kitchen, and so we're kind of in the background, but we also get to be on the center during that time and go to an arty once in a while, you know, that kind of thing. But it's been, I love kids. I feel like I love the energy of, when I say kids, I mean from toddlers to, you know, I don't know, younger people, which means around here is, you know, anyone under 50 is now younger. So, but I like especially that, you know, teens and 20s are very alive, you know, and so I love that energy, and I resonate with it too. So what a blessing that has been to be part of Sahavas, you know, and then also somehow I asked Barbara if I could help out, and I started working on staff in the summertime. So I was paid because we needed more people in the summertime, but just to be able to on the cabin crew, you know, was great. And I did that for a number of years, and then the center went through some financial stuff in the late 90s, and they couldn't pay me anymore, but I still volunteered. So pretty wonderful, rich life, and huge part of it was, of course, Darwin and Jean are living here, and now I would help out at their house, you know, mow the lawn and fix things and stuff like that. And then went through the tough time when Jean died in 95, and that was extremely difficult for Darwin. He was very devoted to her, and just really, really sad for him. And took him, you know, a good year to come around, but he still was Darwin. And I mean, Jean was pretty amazing in her own right. You know, she would say or do these little things that it appeared like she didn't know what she was saying, you know, but they would kind of go right at you. And one of them, I remember once I was driving with them up to the library, and we all got out of the car, and I didn't want to slam the door too much, so I just closed it, but it didn't latch. So then Jean just took the handle and lifted it and gave it more of a shove, and it latched. And she said, the trick is in letting go. So these little things she would say to people, you know, and she'd be at, you know, we'd have, at Darwin's meetings back in Schenectady, he would read like a letter from India that they had gotten, or pass around a sadra or something like that. He'd do the discourses, and then, then in between, we'd stop and have apple juice and cookies, but Jean would invariably sit next to the person that maybe was going through a tough time and was right there with them. And it would happen time and again, you know. And then we'd come back together, and then Bill Cliff would be playing music, and we'd all be singing together. They loved to sing together. And some of them were like kind of old, almost Christian hymns, and others were, you know, our hippie tunes or our Baba tunes, you know, that people had started writing. So, so then now Darwin is doing the discourses, right? And I think I mentioned he hated being recorded, you know, even audio recording, let alone video recording. He did not like it and would not allow it. And then so one time I'm walking up to Baba's porch, Baba's house with Darwin. We get on the porch, we're taking off our shoes, and Marshall's there. Marshall had just come back from India with Mimi and had a very strong trip. And just sitting down, Marshall says, you know, Darwin, we've got to record you. And to my amazement, Darwin says, okay. And then Marshall says, you know, and we've got to record you, and I'm sure Damien will be happy to do it. And I said, sure, yeah. And so, okay, I'll get the equipment. And so the center gave me good equipment, and, you know, Darwin had agreed to do it. And then, so I'm ready to go at the next discourse meeting, and which was every 3 weeks, Darwin would do it. And all ready to go, and Summer was helping take care of Darwin at the house. And so, you know, Summer said something like, should Damien turn on the recorder? And Darwin goes, I'm not so sure. And she goes, well, you know, he went to all this effort to get the equipment and all. So he reluctantly agreed to do it. And this is now in, oh gosh, maybe 2000 to 2004 is when we recorded him. And so, you know, I got to do it. And the next time he was a little bit hesitant, but got to do it again. And then the third time, I'm just waiting for him. And he goes, well, aren't you going to turn it on? So then I knew we were okay. So we recorded him 44 times, and then we transcribed them. We had people listening and typing out. And what we transcribed was the part, he would read the discourse, but then he would speak extemporaneously. Our Baba would just be coming through him, you know. And so that's the part that we recorded, and that became the bulk of Effort and Grace. And as well as, which I think has been an amazing book for so many people. And we also put in there, we would like go out to Ryan's or Quincy's and try to get quiet and get Darwin talking, and we write down little things he'd say. And that went into the book, and then, or something he'd be chatting about it in his kitchen, you know. And we'd always be writing them down, you know. So, anyway, that was such a blessing, you know, to have that friendship with Darwin. It's funny because one time Summer couldn't give him a ride, so I gave him a ride to the discourse meeting, and I think it was as we were getting there, I said, Darwin, you know, you're like a mentor to me on the spiritual path, but you're also my friend. And he just simply said, with his little smile, you know, well, it goes both ways. And it was such a, you know, that's the way he was, you know. And so anyway, that went on, and then he got more and more ill, so we had a team of 25 people, 27 people taking care of him. And we have different shifts, during the day. Some people would do it once a week, some people do it 2 or 3 times a week. And, but it was a really good team. And then he got, sicker, so he couldn't swallow as well, so he had to have a feeding tube, but that actually revived him, and he was doing really well. And then the book was getting ready to come out. Effort and Grace was even advertised to come out in, I don't know, he died in, so now it's 2005. So the book was going to come out in November, and all ready to go. Sherry R. had advertised it even. But so he was, even though he was quite old, now he's 98 years old. Even though he was still very sharp, extremely sharp. And, but then, the decision was made to bring, because Leatrice, his daughter, had died in April, which was a real shock. She had cancer. And then the decision was made by the family to move him to Asheville. And that was very tough on us, that was in 2005. And so we were all pretty much in shock. But then, that was the decision was made. So Sherry asked me to drive him to Asheville. And that was like, oh shit, it's the last thing I want to be doing. But also I felt like I had to help my friend. That was as simple as that. So I did drive him. We got there, and I was there about 8 days, and Rick Dryden came. He was living in North Carolina. He came. So it was good to have the two of us there together. And then I was asked to go home, and Rick stayed. And then Darwin got put into a nursing home. It was a hospice nursing home, and he passed away there on October 2nd. But meanwhile, when I went back, we were trying to organize a way to get him back, because he kind of wanted to come back, but it wasn't meant to be. So, but what a great gift to have that connection with Darwin and Jean, and many, many people. And now the book has been, it just has carried on. So it's kind of sweet. I just wanted to add one thing about, like with Dodro Chen Rinpoche, my wife's teacher, like I felt more and more, I went through this time where I felt it was in conflict with, Jean was spending a lot of time at the temple, and I felt kind of jealous of her doing that, and I felt like either I have to pull back or have my own relationship. So I decided to have my own relationship with the lamas and Tibetan Buddhism. And it was actually quite a gift, that unexpected. And so over the years, I would have little interviews with Rinpoche when he came every 2 years. And so one of the last ones I had, I said, Rinpoche, I'm not, I've been with Meherabad, and he kind of nodded. And he says, I'm not really a Buddhist. I don't do the practice, meaning the chanting visualization practice. And he like looked at me really sharply and said, when you're building the temple, you're doing the practice. So and I felt when he said that, the way I'd been holding it, this division between Babaism or Baba-ness and Buddhism, I felt it like just crumbling. Gosh, I feel like it's getting to the end of wanting to share, then maybe something else bubbles up. But I guess the other big thing is that in '99, I heard that Sfandier was coming to L.A. Sahavas, and I had heard about him. He was here, I think, in '91 or something like that, and people were still talking about it 8 years later about how he and Darwin together was just magic, you know. So I really felt I had to see Sfandier. So I went out to the LA Sahavas and was lucky to meet him fairly early and just said, would you consider coming to Myrtle Beach? And he was probably going to come anyway, you know. But he said yes. And so anyway, so I was lucky to be able to start putting together a trip for him, you know, get the plane tickets and all that. And then so Jane Brown and I were hosting him, making sure he had time to rest and making times when he would talk and time to rest and all that. And it was just so, he got here in '99 to, I think, 2003. He came 9 times. Like every 6 months he came here. And he would give these beautiful talks. You know, he didn't speak English, but, you know, Marnouche or Farshid would translate. And oh man, he was just such a gem. And he'd give you a hug. And, you know, mostly you give a nice 10-second hug, you let go. So you're giving a hug and you're ready to let go. And he still hangs on there like, it's like 20 seconds, 30 seconds, you know. And that was, he was just, oh my God, what a loving person. And I remember one time, several of us have remembered, it was a Sunday, and Darwin was going into Baba's house and going down the long hallway, and Sfandier's leaving Baba's room, and they met at the beginning of that, and they just held each other arm in arm, and the whole house stopped. No one moved. No one wanted to move. And these 2 giants, soul giants, simple giants, and the whole house felt like it was transformed, you know, like the love was permeating even more than normal. And literally it went on for like 2 or 3 minutes at least, and they just held each other arm in arm, and no one moved. You know, no one, we just all, there were several people in the hall or in the, you know, other rooms, just, so they just, you can imagine being at whatever level, we have no idea where anybody's at anyway, but we knew those were great souls. And to have a brother, there aren't too many people they could relate to, so to have 2 folks be there together like that was fantastic, you know. So I think that's probably all I'd like to share, just that I think it is an ongoing, I guess one thing I've learned is that this relationship with Meherabad it's real. It's as real as any relationship we have, probably more real. And it's growing, you know, it's growing step by step. It's growing and getting closer. And what a tremendous gift that we have of every part of it. You know, number one, the relationship with Baba, that we know him in this life, consciously we know him in this lifetime. It's just amazingly fortunate. And I like it too, that it's natural. It's like he's our friend. You know, we talk to him, and you know, we try to listen and follow more what we receive from him. I mean, remember one thing, just working on saving the Ingram Dunes. I just have to share this and that'll be it. But I was walking toward Baba's house, and Larry and Rita Karish were walking the other way, and we met, we're friends, and I told them about the dunes, that they're going to destroy them unless they get preserved. And immediately Larry goes, you should ask Baba to save them. And I said, well, I don't ever ask Baba for anything. You know? And Rita goes, Larry goes, yeah, no, you should, just ask him. It's not for you, just ask him. And Rita goes, yeah, and ask Mara too. And so I said, okay, it clicked, so I went in there, and I didn't say, I went into his bedroom, and Larry told me not to ask if it's your will. Larry said, just straight up. So I did that. And I just said, Baba, please save the Ingram Dunes. And didn't say, if it's your will, just please save this place, a sacred place where you probably walked when you were here, because it was the highest relic dunes in the area. And he said he was here before. But anyway, I said, and then I asked Mara, and I never spoken to Mara that much like that, and her love of beauty and nature, and I felt like asking like that changed my relationship with Baba, because it was like a direct ask from him, and then trusting that he and Mara were there with me. And it just really shifted it felt like our relationship deepened in that. So hopefully this will keep going on, and God willing, and I think it will. And it's kind of exciting to know that it keeps growing, and he's there for each one of us, even ones that don't know he's with them. He's there for them too. So Robin, thanks for this, and sweet.